Thank you, Tina. Just when I was starting to wonder what you did with all your extra free time, putting these things together. So it's a real honor to be included in the list of speakers. Whenever Tina asked me to come and speak today, I asked her vaguely, what sort of thing should I talk about? What do you usually accomplish in this small window? She said, just tell your story. My story in half of it. I think I can do that. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I ended up where I ended up and how I ended up doing what I do. So let's start at the very beginning. Once upon a time, on a place called Earth, there was me. I was born. You see, I already accomplished that when I was very young, so I got off to a flying start. I was born in the top left-hand corner of Australia to Mary and Paul, let me use this, Jeffers, and Tash. But they were both from Belfast in Northern Ireland, and they decided to fly to Australia because of the troubles and all the fighting that was going on in Northern Ireland at that time. And there I was born. But not a whole lot longer, not a whole lot later than that, they changed their entire minds about the whole Australia thing, flew back to Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I grew up, and hence the funny accent. I had a very normal childhood growing up in Belfast, doing all the regular things like learning to ride a bike, watching TV, finding things in the garden, walking around naked a lot. And it was pretty clear, even at a very early age, that I had an absolute knack for capturing the essence of a person in a portrait. And I suppose it was sort of at that point that I knew that I always wanted to draw pictures for a living. But then, when I was not a whole lot older than this, because of all the fighting still going on in Northern Ireland at the time, my parents decided to get me out of the country for the summer, because it was really pretty bad in the early 90s and late 80s. This time I was flown by Seagull to upstate New York, where I went to a summer camp. And that was an incredible experience for me. I met a lot of really interesting people I still keep in touch with. And then about a decade after that, I came back to New York City, this time as an adult, with a valid ID for drinking alcohol. And one guy that I kept in touch with put me up on his sofa for my first stay in New York. And we met each other at the subway, barely remembered each other. And on the way back to his apartment to drop our bags off, we sort of went to the first bar for a quick whiskey and didn't leave there till 3 in the morning. And there, a very, very important relationship was founded. He also makes art, and over that drunken conversation and many since drunk conversations, we decided that we wanted to work on projects together, like we've done with this, the book project, which if you go on my website, you can find out more about. Ultimately, we wanted to figure out some scenario where we could share a studio space together. And so, over the course of 3 years, I applied for my visa to come to America, and that's what we did. We now share a studio in Brooklyn. There's one part of it. There's another part of it. And I've now been here for a grand total of 3 years, which is absolutely whizzed by, and it's really changed me. It's really changed the art that I make, and as much as it changed me, I think my rude and very secretive Northern Irish ways have started to rub off in his door. Okay. So, being Northern Irish, drawing and storytelling is a very important part of my cultural background. I've always loved drawing, and even as a kid, you could clearly see that I could draw in a photograph. Those years of art college really paid off. But really telling stories is a very, very important part of the cultural clothwork of being Irish. And I use my art as a way of telling stories. My dad always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and I kind of stand by that. Not that I'm not a trustworthy person. But I use my canvas as a way of getting across these narratives that I just felt compelled to tell. And very early on in my art career, I experimented with putting words over a picture, and the whole relationship of what happens when you mix words and pictures became a thing of interest for me. And for a long time, I was making paintings that took an image and then a contrasting word and put them together. And I was really having a lot of fun exploring what happens if. That was the direction that all of my early paintings took. And then, sort of kind of by mistake actually, about, let's see what year now, yeah, just over a decade ago, I realized that the perfect platform for mixing words and pictures together were children's picture books. And I, by accident, came up with my first concept for a children's picture book. The drawing on the left there was a concept sketch for a painting that I was intending to do. And I thought it was a very cool concept of taking this idea of somebody trying to catch something as intangible as a star. And I started doing multiple variations on this theme. And then whenever I was looking at it and sort of laying them out, it occurred to me that this is a story. And I decided to, for my final year of college, because I went back to university, I decided to turn it into a picture book. So at that point, when I graduated college, I thought rather than get a proper job, I thought I might tell stories and draw pictures for a living. And so I went about getting my book published, and that went well. So I decided to get my book published in other languages, and that also went well. And I decided to write more books. So this thing is just so the second book that I made, Lost and Found, and then directly after that, because it was also still going well, I made The Incredible Book-Eating Boy, and The Way Back Home, and The Great Paper Caper. This is a different cover than we usually see here. And then recently, The Heart of the Bottle. Now, a really cool thing happened right when I was starting to make the art for The Great Paper Caper. I had the opportunity to turn one of my books into a short film that I worked on with Studio AKA, this animation company in London. And I think the trailer's going to come up. Oh, okay. Is there noise? A question I get asked a lot whenever I'm doing events and book signings is about my process, how to actually go about making a picture book. Do I write the words first, or do I make the illustrations first? And the answer is that I generally do both at the same time. I always keep a sketchbook for all sorts of things, for writing lists, for remembering very important things, because no matter how important something is, everything in my brain stands an equal chance of being forgotten. So here, I'm going to go through the process of just one double-page spread in one book, just to give you an idea of the way that I actually work. So I start with thinking about the general idea, or the general direction of the story's going to go, and I start drawing milestones in that in the direction of that, and try to lock down certain points. And then I just start thinking about how things will look, and right around then I'm putting the words together, and that is all happening as a way of pulling the story out from a small general idea. So then I take all of these drawings and I then start to put them into some sort of sequence. And the thumbnailing process is probably the most time consuming, because this is where I have to take the entire story and make it fit into 32 pages with a beginning and middle and an end. And that is the most enjoyable and also the most difficult part of it. So then once I know where everything is going to go, roughly, I work things up to a more detailed level, using a dipping pen and ink, and then the layouts, the text is sort of dropped in after that, like this. And then I would take these layouts and I would make the final art. And this is how it looks in the end product. I really use all different types of material. I don't know, how many people here make art with their hands, sort of like not digital art, but material-wise? Yes. A lot of people. Okay. So I don't know if you guys are also the same as this, but I think that attitudes in our college are changing a lot. People aren't so defined by technique anymore for concept. Well, that was what I found anyway. And maybe because of this, I'm not really tied to any one discipline, any one way of making art. So I mean, I use a lot of watercolor. Like that piece is entirely watercolor. I use acrylic paint, gouache. I also use a lot of collage, old books, paper, and really whatever is kind of closest to hand at any given point. That's generally how it goes. I want to talk as well at this point about the separate career that I've had the entire way through my picture book career. The whole way through, I decided that I didn't want to pick one direction or the other. When I graduated from college, I was really into making kids books, but I was also really into still making paintings. So the whole way through, I was still doing that. And I think it's important to point out that the two are always cross-relating. They're influencing each other all the time. Like, for example, the way that I use a lot of space is pretty prevalent in both. And obviously the way that I do people is, clearly very similar. The colors that I use as well. But now I'm going to break off and talk a little bit about my painting work, because remember I was saying that the early art that I was making, I was really into putting words and pictures together. And whenever I discovered that picture books were really the perfect arena for this, my fine art took a totally different direction. It went off in a completely different way. I started becoming really interested in logic and emotion and mathematical equations in art and what happens when you mix the two together. And right around the beginning stages of me exploring this direction, I met a professor of quantum mechanics, who probably is the smartest person I've ever met in the world. And for a long time, we spent many months meeting up over coffee and mostly me asking him questions about maths and the relationship it had with art and with philosophy and painting, and really just about the quest for intelligence. And I think it's worth pointing out that it's no accident that I was working on The Incredible Book-Eating Boy at exactly the same time as I was having these conversations with him. So after about a year of these conversations, I went back to my studio and made a whole bunch of paintings around the theme of quantum physics. That looked a little like this. It's the different views of looking at our world and trying to understand everything. And I then curated and organized my own show in Northern Ireland, and what I discovered is that if you have enough free drink, people will show up, and even the smartest person on earth will get really drunk. This is a direction that my art is still continuing to go, where I'm just totally fascinated with different ways of looking at the same thing. For example, I'm just going to talk briefly about this one painting. This painting is about the emotional way of looking at a subject and a purely literal way of looking at information. So on the left, you've got classic figurative painting of a person, and then in the right panel, that same information is replaced with numerical information. So those are Pantone numbers. So it's just the same thing, but different ways of expressing it, and that's something that I'm still looking at, like the missing links, the gaps in our understanding of. This is supposed to be the same hammer and nail. It's called before and after painting number one. The best part is there is no number two. So really just about the gaps in alternative perspectives is something that's still something that I'm exploring. And I think it's the fact that I kind of go into rabbit warrens of very serious and philosophical debates in my art. And I think that I can do this without driving myself nuts, because I also have my picture books. And I think there's a degree of seriousness and not overly sweetness in my picture books because of this work. So I think the balance between the two has really helped me out. Okay, so I'm going to give you just I have no idea how I'm doing on time. Okay. Here's just a brief overview of what I'm working on at the minute, just like a snapshot of my life right now. I'm still working on paintings that are about different ways of looking at things, and this painting is called Fathom painting, so it's really about trying to measure things that can't be really measured. And I'm doing a joint project with Mac Primo, the guy that I was showing you earlier, that I share a studio with, about systems, or rather individuality within systems. So a whole snapshot of people that we know in New York and how they are, like their personality. The painting, that's ultimately what figurative painting is about, but then also what their place in America and their place within a system is. so that's something I'm going to be still working on, and then these are going to be joint pieces that Mac and I work on together. So that's something I'll be putting on our website probably later this year. Although I didn't really talk about it that much, I work on freelance commercial illustration work, and so this is a job that I actually have to finish up today. This is a book cover for John Boyne's new novel called No Body Water Runs Away. And then we also have a third studio knit, and here it is an exercise in, or rather an example of why it is fantastic to have a really good creative dynamic group. Over lunch, the three of us would sit together and just talk shit about all the things that we think would be brilliant. And we decided, rather than just talk about it, let's actually do something about it. So we started a company, the three of us, called You and Me, the World, which sells products that aren't identifiably any one of our styles, but it's just a way of getting these ideas out there. So this is a series of all occasions cards, which really I don't think we have yet to encounter an occasion that cannot be covered by one of these cards. The first one says thank you, the second one says sorry, and the third one says fuck you. On top of that, clearly everyone needs this machine kills fascists pencil. And I have a weakness for drawing maps, so I thought it would be a great idea to have a screen print map with a bunch of pens you stick in to try your global domination. And yeah, the weakness for, the fondness rather for drawing maps is something that I try to do as often as possible. This is a regular gig that I have with United Airlines, where it's one city in 5 hours, and they put a map in, the in-flight magazines in the back of the seat. So. Also, what I really intend to do this year is finally do something with this series of drawings that I've been talking about doing something about for probably a decade. There's a little game that I play myself where I take a mark on a page with a cup of coffee, and then I draw and incorporate it somehow into an illustration. So yeah, this has been going on for years, and I really have never done anything with it. So procrastination was deeply rooted in there somewhere. And then we are also in the throes of Mac and myself and 2 other artists who worked on the book project that I mentioned earlier. We were about 3/4 of the way going through the project again, which is proving to be a very interesting experience. Right about now, I'm about to take a very different jump in my picture book words as well. I'm going to start making a whole series of books about these characters. So I think the first people outside, possibly HarperCollins UK, to really see these. I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to be showing them, but really these characters are sort of an excuse for me to get across my cynical socio-political ramblings about the world in the children's book. So that'll be interesting. And I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the picture book that I just finished, called Up and Down, which is a direct follow-on from Lost and Found. It's about the boy and penguin again. I'm just going to show you some of the illustrations. The penguin gets ideas about his station, and has the notion that he wants to fly, and they get separated again. This shows you the merits of carrying a portable, what do you call that game again? Backgammon. Can you remember? It's one of my favorite games, and I totally blank on it. Which clearly can't happen. And in case you missed any of that, I'm going to give it all to you again here in a very... I'm Oliver Jeffers, and we're in my studio in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I make art. I make oil paintings, I make commercial illustrations, I make collage, and I suppose I'm best known for making picture books for children. I got into children's books kind of by mistake. Being from Northern Ireland, I've always been really interested in narrative and storytelling. A lot of my early art was mixing just words and pictures, and how they would change each other. And I was doing that for a long time until it occurred to me one day that what I was doing was meat loads of picture books. I write them and illustrate them at the same time, and I mean that not by using both hands, although I wish I could do that. I almost can't separate them in my brain. The pictures to find the words and the words to find the pictures. The first picture book I made was How to Catch a Star, and that's the one that happened almost by accident. It began light, and I sort of put them in some sort of sequence, and really before I knew it, I was making a picture book that was followed directly by Lost and Found, and the idea for that story came about from in Belfast, where this kid climbed into the penguin enclosure and managed to kidnap a baby penguin. The third book was The Incredible Book-Eating Boy. That was an important jump for me to make because there was this whole other illustration style that existed in my sketchbooks. The fourth one, The Way Back Home, was a return to the boy character from the first two books. The fifth book that I made was called The Great Paper Caper. And that was the first book that I made in New York. The Heart of the Ball was actually an old story. This film is being made at the minute where the main protagonist in the film is an aspiring children's bookmaker, and the director of the film contacted me asking me if I wanted to create the book that this character ultimately made. I read the manuscript, and the tone really reminded me of The Heart of the Ball, and so the first thing I did was went and found those original drawings, that original manuscript, brought it out, and started working on it all over again 5 years later. I have just finished making the art for it, and it's going to be released sometime in 2010. Okay, I generally start with a sketchbook and start to record down all of the different nuggets for ideas for this direction the story is going to go, both in drawing form and writing form, and then I begin to piece them all together into the final story. This is the first attempt at storyboarding, so it's all very rough, and then once I have a vague idea of what is going to be in each page, I start to visualize it from the direction of the camera, and I do a lot more detailed line art, which then gets scanned in, and they go on to the final layouts. And then I take this, I bring it over to my light box, I take my paper, and I know exactly what size the illustration needs to be, and I got it when I go to start making the final art. Really, I mix all different types of media together. An old book cover and white pen, different types of paper with colored pencil, acrylic paint. Really, whatever material the illustration calls for at that point. I keep writing children's books, and I keep making children's books because I still have them inside me. One is here. I think there's one around my elbow somewhere. I'm not sure.
Actually, I got to see the slides last night. Like he sent them to me, and I was just sitting there flipping through. I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool!" And I actually did not really know what he's going to say at the bad rabbit. What is he going to say here? Thank you so much, Oliver. I think we have a little bit of time for if you have questions. And anyone have questions?
Where do you go in New York to learn how to inspire?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to live like right by the promenade, so that's generally I think the best view, the views, and the whole park setup that's going on down there. Well, we listen to them working from 6:30 every morning, so whenever that's done, it's lovely. Yeah, they're any of the parks really, but I also just love sort of being in the thick of it all. I think New York City itself is just inspiring, and although this is sort of a weird answer, we kind of have a fantastic studio setup. We moved in there, and it was just like this white, sort of greasy white box that we used to store hot dog carts. It's like an old carriage house, and really because of just lack of budget, we kitted it out with shit that we found on the street. There's a lot of people throw away a lot of really good things in the Brooklyn area, so we made walls out of old windows, etc. And after 2.5 years of that, the end result is actually a really cool environment. And we're going to be taking photographs now.
Yeah, I had the chance to visit him at the studio last week, and I walked out of there thinking, I am not creative as these guys are. No, it's so cool. Can you talk a little bit about the book project?
Oh, talk about, okay, yeah. So I don't know, well, probably know it's very aware it happened a while ago. About 6 years ago, myself and Mac, my older brother, and then a guy that Mac went to college with, were in a bar, and we had this brilliant idea where we would take a black sketchbook. At that point, I lived in Belfast. We would take I'll stand up again, just people can't see. Took a standard black sketchbook and decided to send it back and forth across the Atlantic in a call and response manner. So Mac started off making one double big spread, then FedExed it to me, and I responded just to what I saw, and then sent it to Duke, and Duke sent Rory, vice versa, around the circle line.
Do you know layer tennis? Do you know layer tennis? Does anyone know layer tennis?
Yeah.
It's like It's like the old school version of
Yeah.
hair tennis.
Okay, well, I gotta look that up. So yeah, so that was then after 36 weeks we did one spray a week. So the structure was pretty tight. The booker would arrive with someone on a Wednesday morning, and by Monday you would have to send it back out again. And by the end of the 36 weeks, it covered 75,000 miles, something like that. And then we exhibited it in a utility tunnel under the River Lagan in Belfast, and then in New York in a space down in Wall Street. When we finished the project, we thought never again. But then about a year later, we all kind of got romantic about it, and we thought, you know what, maybe we should do one every 5 years. So we started it, I suppose about a year ago. This time it was a very different project. There's been times where it looks like it might not get finished at all, as long as it's in place. But we're back on track. We're more than 3/4 of the way through, and we're doing it all year. Yes.
Do you see materials on the street or in stores that you want to use for your collage, and you just like?
Oh yeah.
I mean, is it like you see a texture and you need to grab it, and you don't know what you're going to use it for, but you just have a pile?
Yeah. I got a library of like really cool pieces of blank paper, and a library of really cool just photographs and books, etc. The Incredible Book Eating Boy came about partly because of the work that I was doing with the quantum physicist, but also partly because of the book project. Because I thought one of my big things that was drummed into me in college was always think beyond the obvious conclusion. You can do something more, you can bring something more to it than just what's expected, then absolutely do it, set yourself aside. So for the exhibition launch of the book exhibition, we decided that rather than just sending out a boring invitation, why don't we just collect a lot of the old hardback books that are being thrown away, and we'll take the back covers off and we'll screen print the invitation onto that, because it's appropriate. So we did that in Belfast, and Belfast Central Library was every year they did a clear out of books that haven't been loaned out in 5 or 10 years or whatever. So we got our hands on 200 really hardback books. But I didn't have the heart to throw the middle bits away, so I kept a sort of stack of those in my studio. And then actually when I was going to make the final art for the Incredible Book Eating Boy, it just made total sense to make it on those pieces of paper. So yeah, that was born out of convenience that was just there, and that happens all the time. I'm aware of being prepared material-wise for whenever I'm in the throes of the project. Yes?
One of the things that I really like about your books is the art, but I also like your handwriting. And it's consistent all throughout all of your books. And like the map that you did with Reed, the rural Reed.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something that you're still handwriting, or has it become like
Oh no. It's because it changes every time. If you keep it electronic, I think they'll take a lot of fun out of it, because then it would be like the A's would all look the same. So I get a little too big of a kick out of it.
What's more difficult to storytelling? How do you do it? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? Or me? Ask it again there, sorry.
What is more difficult for you in between storytelling and exhibition? And how do you usually come up with a story?
She's asking which is more difficult between the storytelling and the illustrations. I don't know, I don't really separate them, because I don't think of an illustration and then try and apply it to a story. I think they happen at the same time. I really don't try to dissect it too much, because I'd be really scared that if I figured out that formula, I might not be able to put it all back together again. I think without running the risk of dissecting anything too much, for me, I have multiple executions. I have multiple outputs for what I do, depending on the concept. So everything I do is concept driven. I think it says a lot there, and then I decide on what's the best way to present this concept to the world. So that's all sorts. I suppose the storytelling is the more important part.
So how do you actually come up with that story?
I have a box that I keep under my bed, and I keep all the stories in it. I don't know. Really, that's why I carry a notebook. Because I mean, how often are you in a bar or cafe, a really interesting conversation with somebody, and they say something like, "Oh, that's good. I'll remember that." I don't know about you, but so yeah, and people recommending things, it just goes in one ear and out the other. So sometimes I see things that go in one ear and out the other. So I think it's really important to just record and just I suppose I get my ideas from just listening to people. People say the most interesting shit, so it's hilarious.
Do you ever tweet it?
No, I don't know. That's why I haven't figured out how to do it from my phone. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Is there any place else you would like to live?
There's a lot of places. I would love to live in France. We had, before Suzanne and I moved to New York, we considered moving to London. But then we realized we have to live in England. As Irish people, that's good. But I spent a lot of time in London, so I just felt that I would go for the bigger challenge first. That's whenever I try to get published, I thought I'd start at the top and work my way down. I thought New York's going to be a harder place to end up, so I'll start there. But I would, we spent some time in France, and it's a really tremendous one.
I was going to say, what were your favourite?
Of course, an English person.
What were your favourite stories and characters that inspired you?
Well, right here I have Harold in Perfect Round. I thought that was, rather than most other kids wanted to be Superman or whatever, I was like, I wanted one of those crayons. I think my favourite story growing up was definitely Moon Man by Tommy Unger. Have you heard of that one? If you haven't, definitely look it up. It's absolutely tremendous. Tommy Unger is a bit of a weird character. He gave up. He was at the height of his picture book career, but really no one was touching him. That he gave it up to political posters, and then he's with Loose now in the south of Ireland. I think he's with Czech or something, and made his career in New York. But yeah, absolutely. That was my favorite story.
Oh, go ahead. You can do this one.
Happy enough.
Good answer. All right, thank you so much, Oliver.
Okay.
This was
My
really
pleasure.
inspiring. Thank you.